Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Just to let you know, we do have an Instagram now. It's called Book Life Reads, so don't forget to go check it out. And it'll have the books that we've previously read and the upcoming books and maybe some polls on what you want to listen to be read. In Search of a for Raintree, Chapter 12. I was free and I was alive. As I put my clothes on, I kept looking in every direction, fearful they might return. I'd run for safety into the fields, even in the deep snow in my bare feet if I had to. Tears ran down my face, but I didn't stop. I was finally dressed and started down the road to the opposite direction from which they had taken, praying I wouldn't run into them again. As I walked, I repeated the license number. Out in the open, with no obstruction to impede it, the wind shrieked with icy glee, but they didn't touch me. It must have been 30 below, but I didn't even feel the cold. I was numb and beyond feeling. I strained for any sounds of an approaching vehicle and often turned to look behind me. I had no idea where I was. Finally, I saw a light in the distance. I felt fear and hope at the same time. When I heard the light, I saw that it was a farmyard light. Then I heard a dog barking. As I walked down the driveway, a large German shepherd came out to inspect me. It continued its thunderous barking all the way to the porch door. A porch light was turned on, and a man looked out cautiously. From the way he looked at me, I'm sure he at first thought I was some drunken squaw who had gotten into a fight and had been thrown out of a car. He asked me in only after I told him I had been raped, and would he please call the police. His wife had come out, and she offered me a cup of coffee. I asked her where the washroom was while he called the police. After I washed my mouth out and came out of the washroom, they asked me what had happened. The chill that hadn't touched me outside caught up with me in the warmth of their kitchen, and I began to tremble so violently that the woman went and got a blanket off their bed. Tears streamed down my face, and my teeth were chattering, although I still didn't sob. When the RCMP came, I expected that they would insinuate I had somehow provoked the rape, but the two officers were soft-spoken and kind. They wanted me to show them where the car had been parked, and on the drive there, I had the unreasonable fear that they, too, might turn on me. We soon came to a place where I had walked into the deeper snow to get my purse. When they finished examining the tire tracks and the area, they drove me to the hospital back in Winnipeg. I sat in the back seat, my teeth still clicking together from the coldness that just wouldn't leave me. They took me to the emergency of the Health Science Center, where Cheryl had been taken just a few days earlier. The doctor on duty examined me and took all the samples that would be required of court purpose if they ever caught those rapists. As they were preparing to swab my mouth, I told them I had washed it out. He chided me for doing so, saying they need all the evidence. I couldn't believe his words. I was supposed to go around with the residue of piss in my mouth for sake of evidence? I figured he had enough evidence. Before he sent me for x-rays, he asked me if I was related to Cheryl Raintree. When I told him I was, he informed me that he had been on duty when she came through. The x-ray showed no fractures or broken bones, so the police took me to their headquarters to take my statement. They told me to recount everything exactly as I remembered it, and the whole thing took a long time, and it was taxing. While I talked, tears rolled down my face, but again, I didn't do any sobbing. It seemed to me my voice droned on and on and on, but at last I was finished. They told me they would be talking to Cheryl in the morning to see if they had any ideas on possible motives, since I was initially picked up at her door. As they drove me back to the hotel, they informed me that they would later have me look at some pictures and see if I could make any identifications. They also said they would have to take all my clothing for purposes of evidence. They waited outside in the hall while I changed into my nightgown and robe. Once they had gone, I took a long bath. My whole body felt sore and I seemed to ache all over. Although I stayed in the bath for a long, long time, thinking about the rapists, I couldn't get rid of their smell. I tried to fathom why they would do such a thing, but I couldn't. It was beyond reason. Later on, in bed, every once in a while, I'd give a shudder when the visions of the night became too clearly realistic. It was a long time before my tension eased off. I stopped shivering and I finally drifted into sleep. I was awakened by the sound of someone knocking on my door. It was Cheryl and two officers, although not the same ones as last night before. Apparently, they had picked up Cheryl and brought her to the hotel. Cheryl at first was going to throw her arms around me, but as she saw me brace for the pain, she stopped. "Oh, April, I'm so sorry. It's all my fault you came here in the first place. I'm sorry." "It's all right, Cheryl. I'm okay, really." I looked at the two officers. One of them said they would like me to go with them to look at a car. They said they'd wait for me in the lobby while I got ready. After they left, Cheryl said again, "This is all my fault." I was dead tired and I snapped, "Oh, Cheryl, stop it. It's not your fault. It just happened." I felt awful for using such a toned voice, so I added in a lighter tone, "Come, help me get dressed. I can barely move." She did so in silence. Before I left, I asked her to wait for me, and we would go together and get her things and the rented car. As we were on our way to the public safety building, the RCMP officer told me that they had seized the car and arrested the owner. I had to identify both the car and its owner. Some of the buttons had been found in the car, so my identification was merely routine. But a little while later, I identified the owner as one of the rapists from the lineup. He looked very scared, almost like a little boy. Even though he had taken part in the heinous crime against me, I couldn't help feeling sorry for him. All I wanted to do was hate him. I remembered that he, Stephen Gurnham, had done nothing to try and stop what had happened. My feeling of sympathy disappeared. When I returned to the hotel, Cheryl was waiting for me. "April, you look exhausted. Maybe you should try and get some sleep, and I'll go and get the car and that. Do you want something to eat?" "Yes, I'm starved, and I need some coffee. Are you sure you want to go back there alone?" "Oh, sure. After this, I don't care if Mark does make a scene." After we had eaten and she made sure I was comfortable, Cheryl left. I got out of bed and ran some water in the tub. I got in and then ran the rest of the water as hot as I could stand it. I lathered myself in lots of soap. I had to get rid of the awful smell of me. I could smell it as if they were in the same room as me. The dirty, stinking bodies. I could feel their hands all over me. I had to get rid of that feeling too. I scrubbed wherever I wasn't sore or bruised, sometimes hitting a sore area that brought back new pain. But no matter how much I scrubbed and lathered, I still felt dirty and used. It was no use. I cried, my tears rolling down my cheeks into the water because it was no use. I couldn't get myself clean. I would never be clean again. Free from the awful smells, free from the filthy feelings, free from the awful visions. In bed, I realized just how much I had learned to hate. It wasn't a natural emotion. I had known deep resentments, but if I had been given choices, I would rather have been friends with people like the DeRosiers, Mother Radcliffe, and Heather. But a real, cold, deep hatred had crept into me, and I knew that I wouldn't want to let go of it. Not for the rest of my life. I wanted those two men, in particular, dead. By my hand, yes, I wished with all my might that I could be the one to kill them, and make their deaths prolonged and painful. I knew what I'd do. I'd castrate them. Then I'd watch them bleed to death. In agony. Oh, I wanted them dead. I had been touched by evil, and from now on, it would always be a part of me. Wanting three men dead was evil in itself, but nonetheless, I wanted them dead. Finally, I fell asleep. When I woke up, I saw the suitcase and the keys to the car, but Cheryl wasn't there. She must have gone to get something to eat. I got dressed and went to the restaurant. She wasn't there, but I had something to eat anyway. It was almost 11 p.m. When I got back to my room. Cheryl still wasn't there. Maybe she had gone for a drink. I looked in the mirror and hoped that most of the bruises would disappear within a week. Cheryl came back about 15 minutes later. "You're awake. How long have you been up?" "Almost an hour." "How did it go?" I asked purposely, not asking where she had been. "Mark wasn't even there. He moved out, I guess. I was just down in the lounge. Are you hungry?" "No, I just had something to eat in the restaurant. I had a good sleep and I feel much better. I bought a newspaper and I was going to look through it, but I wanted to talk to you first. About what? Cheryl asked in a guarded tone, as if she had read my thoughts. Well, I'm supposed to get some money from Bob once the divorce goes through. We could buy ourselves a house. What do you think? You mean you'll get enough money from Bob to buy a house? She asked. Well, I'm not exactly sure how much it's going to be, but I'm sure there'll be enough for a down payment. I retreated to half-truths. I didn't know yet exactly how much I would be receiving, but I was sure I'd be able to afford 2 average-sized homes. Why not? Beats renting, Cheryl shrugged. Good. We can start looking tomorrow. I started looking through the ad section of the newspaper while Cheryl turned the television on. Do I get a say on where we'll live? She asked. Of course. I haven't any strong preferences. I only know where I don't want to live. I was glad she was interested. 2 weeks later, I was en route to Toronto, a day before my divorce hearing. I went to my place on Woodbine and settled everything with the landlord, telling him that after the 27th, I would no longer be needing the place. On Wednesday morning, plastered with makeup to cover my bruises, I met with my lawyer, Mr. Feldman, and we went to the courthouse together. Bob, Heather, and Barbara Radcliffe were all waiting outside the courtroom. So I made a special effort to be busy talking to Mr. Feldman to justify my ignoring them. Inside the courtroom, everything went smoothly, although I was nervous when I was on the stand. I also experienced feelings of hurt and regret when a former friend testified about the relationship in which Bob and Heather were involved during our marriage. But when it was over, I felt almost smug, since I was more independent, more wise than I had ever been before in my life. I wasn't quite as smug as Heather, though. She had a possessive hold on Bob's arm as we left. Remembering the rage I had felt on the day of the revelation, I was tempted to go up to them and say something terribly sarcastic, but since I couldn't think of anything, I left quietly with Mr. Feldman. He told me that his fee could come out of the settlement, as we had agreed, and then I would receive the balance of the money through my bank within 3 weeks. At the latest, later that evening, I was on a flight back to Winnipeg. Cheryl had continued looking for a house while I was gone for the few days, and when I got back, she had found a house she liked on Poplar Avenue. It was close to Henderson Highway, Watt Street, and the Red River. Come summer, we'd be able to take walks and watch the boats. Ever since I had spent those long hours by the river when I was with the DeRosiers, I had found areas by the water had a soothing kind of feeling. Sometimes, if I watched the water long enough, I got the feeling that it was I who was moving. I also loved to watch the birds circle overhead, swooping down now and then for a morsel of food. I thought Cheryl's choice was a very good one, and I asked the saleslady what the earliest date of possession would be. Unfortunately, she said it wouldn't be until March 1st. That meant another month of living in the hotel room. That same evening, Cheryl and I both settled in our room to watch television. Things were shaping up. I can't wait for March 1st, eh? We'll have to go shopping for furniture and make sure they can deliver by March 1st. Let's see, that's a Wednesday. Yeah, there shouldn't be any problem. Are you sure you want to take an upstairs bedroom? I'm sure. That way you'll be close enough to the kitchen, and when I come down in the morning, you'll have coffee and breakfast all ready for me. Oh yeah? Thanks a lot, I said as I threw a pillow at her. Then she looked at her watch and said, Hey, April, you want to go down to the lounge with me and have a few drinks? To celebrate finding ourselves a new home? I noticed she had grown fidgety, and only then did I suspect why. An instant decision was required. Sure, sounds like a good idea. Later that night, when we were both in bed, I was unable to go to sleep. I had no idea on how to deal with Cheryl. It appeared she really needed those drinks. Maybe she was an alcoholic. And what would have happened if I had refused to go along with her? She'd been like a child asking me for a favor. Would she have reacted like a child and thrown a tantrum if I had not gone along? I thought that. From now on, I would have to be careful with my words and reactions, and that was the only way I knew how to deal with Cheryl. I was also caught up on my own problems, spent hours thinking over the rape and its consequences. What would I and other squaws get out of my going to court? Maybe 2 years of safety from them, those particular rapists. Probably less, because hardly any criminal ever served a full sentence anymore. Rehabilitation today meant coddling the prisoners to the point of giving them every down-home comfort. Cheryl had told me of a lot of Native men who did something illegal, so they would land in jail for the winter months, so that was a big deal about going to prison. I sighed at the hopelessness of so-called justice, mostly because there was nothing for a victim, nothing especially for victims of sexual assaults, except humiliation in and out of the courtrooms, nothing but more taxes to put luxuries into the penal institutions. To keep a single prisoner for a year cost more than what a security guard earned in that year. So where was the justice of it? The only consolation I could derive was from killing them over and over again in my mind. I had an appointment to see Mr. Lord, who was handling the real estate transaction for me on February 8th. He was very happy to see me, and despite my fears that I would be embarrassed because of my divorce, everything went smoothly. When I came out of his office, it was almost noon. Roger Madison came out of his office just then, and he seemed not at all surprised to see me. I was wondering if he had remembered me, this old verbal fencing partner. When he had said in a pleasant voice, "Hello, April. How are you?" "Hello, Mr. Madison. I'm fine, thank you. How about you?" "Fine. Alex told me you were coming in today." "Oh." "I was looking forward to seeing you again," he smiled, and then asked, "How about lunch?" "Okay, I'd like that." I did most of the talking over lunch. He listened and drew more out of me with appropriate questions. He asked me if I would go out with him sometime, his gentle, concerned side of Roger I hadn't seen before. I wondered why he had never gotten married. Then I wondered if he had gotten married. "Have you been married?" I asked. "No, I never found that the girl I want to spend the rest of my life with. Once I thought I found her." By the reflective way he looked at me when he said that, I wondered if I could have been that girl. But I didn't have the gumption to ask that question. "Well, I guess I better let you get back to the office. Thank you for the lunch. You can reach me at the Maryland Hotel. That's where I'll be staying until we move into our house." Before I headed back to the hotel, I bought several books for Cheryl and me. There wasn't much that one could do in a hotel room. I picked up a book and called Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee by D. Brown. T. Brown. Cheryl would like that. Maybe it could keep her from going down to the lounge. Like that morning, she said she was going to visit Nancy, but then Nancy was supposed to have a steady job. So now Cheryl was visiting her during the day. Maybe Nancy worked nights, or maybe Cheryl was drinking somewhere. No, although Cheryl had a drink almost every day, she'd never been drunk or even appeared to be close to being drunk. Maybe drinks to her were just like what coffee was to me. I couldn't get a day started without at least 2 cups of coffee. On Thursday, Roger phoned in the morning to ask if Cheryl and I would like to have dinner at his place on Friday evening. I told Cheryl about it, excited that he really had called. I really didn't think he'd call me. Isn't this the same guy whose guts you used to hate when you worked at the law firm? The same one. Oh, you're not going to tell him that tomorrow night, are you? Don't worry, I'm not even going to be there tomorrow night. Oh, you have to. Oh, but I don't. He really wants you there. I've got things to do. Besides, you don't need me to hold your hand. I tried to change her mind, but she wouldn't budge. Friday evening started out with both Roger and I trying to make polite conversation. I guess he was as uncomfortable as I was. After the meal, I was sipping coffee and I asked him, "Roger, how come you were so nasty to me when I worked there?" "I liked you," he smiled. "Well, that was no way to treat someone you liked." "Well, I got your attention, didn't I?" "Until that man came along." "I did like you, you know," I said. "I hated you too. I hated liking you, of course. If I hadn't known you liked me, then maybe things would have been so different." "Well, that's what I get for playing games. I've decided not to play games anymore. So, why didn't Cheryl come tonight?" "She has no faith in a man's cooking?" "No, she just figured out we ought to be alone, I guess. It was a very good meal. Where did you learn to cook?" "I've been a bachelor for a long time. You were telling me about your marriage. Care to tell me about why the divorce?" "Well, I divorced Bob on grounds of adultery. But now, when I think about it, that's not what bothered me the most. My mother-in-law, she was some lady. She didn't want to be a grandmother to a bunch of little half-breeds, as she put it. Why would she say a thing like that? you're not Indian, are you? No, I'm a Métis. I had to force those words out. And from the way you said that, I'd gather you're not too proud of it. Roger had a hint of understanding smile on his face, but his eyes were serious. I'm not. It would be better to be a full-blooded Indian or full-blooded Caucasian. But being a half-breed, well, there's just nothing there. You can admire Indian people for what they once were. They had a distinct heritage, or is it culture? Anyway, you can see how much was taken from them and white people. Well, they convinced each other that they were a superior race, and you can see they were responsible for the progress we have today. Cheryl once said, "The meek shall inherit the earth." Big deal, because who's going to want it once the whites are through with it? So, the progress is questionable. Even so, what was a luxury yesterday is a necessity today, and I enjoyed the necessities. But what have the Métis people got? Nothing. Being a half-breed, you feel only the shortcomings of both sides. You feel you're part of the drunken Indians you see on Main Street, and if you inherit brown skin like Cheryl did, you identify with the Indian people more. In today's society, there isn't anything positive about them that I've seen. And when people say offhandedly, "Oh, you shouldn't be ashamed of being Métis," well, generally they haven't a clue as to what it's like being a native person. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean it. I meant the words. I didn't mean for them to come out all at once. I was really embarrassed. I had held those words in for such a long time, and I laid them on Roger of all people. Well, believe it or not, I understand. There will always be some sort of discrimination, whether it is someone discriminating against the Indian on Main Street or your church telling you how to teach your children its beliefs because theirs is the only right one. I've got a brother, an adopted brother, who's an Ojibwe. Joe thinks it's not important what others think of him. It's what he thinks of himself that counts. Well, Cheryl lives pretty much by that philosophy, and even so, she comes down with a drinking problem, I think. I'm not really sure. Anyway, only she has the right to tell me I ought to be proud of what I am because she's worked so hard to do something about the native image. Your sister sounds remarkable. Maybe something is bothering her. It could be she's impatient to see the changes, or it could be almost anything. I think my being back in Winnipeg will help a lot. It's funny, you're the last person I thought I'd be able to talk to about these things. Thanks for listening. I find you interesting. I'm not going to tell you to be proud of what you are. Just don't be so ashamed.